In the previous video, we saw how screens can give you a better overview than dashing through the latest data and graphs. You learned how to create your own pages containing graphs and status information about hosts and host groups. But there is another way to visualize the status of your network, and that is using maps. In my opinion, maps are the coolest feature in Zabbix when it comes to getting an overview. Let's dive right in and take a look at the one map that Zabbix provides by default. Let's go to Configuration Maps. And here you see the so-called local network map. I click on the name and get to the editor just like with the screens. Okay, this does not look very convincing yet, but what you see already is that you're not restricted to placing graphs and other widgets in a table like when using screens. Instead, you can freely add icons anywhere on such a map. When I click on the icon of the Zabbix server, I get another window allowing me to edit the properties of this icon. But the default map is pretty boring, so let's create a better one. I go back and create a new map by clicking Create Map in the top right corner. I'm giving the map a name, and as dimensions, I choose 960 by 540 pixels. I already uploaded a background image that I'm using here. The automatic icon mapping allows you to configure which icon is chosen for a certain kind of host. For example, if the OS string in the inventory field of a host is Linux, you could assign an icon looking like a penguin. But I'm leaving it to manual and will choose the icon myself. Icon Highlight decorates host icons with circles or squares. If there is a problem with a certain host and a trigger is active, then the host on the map will get a colored circle around the icon. The color stands for the severity. And if you set a host to maintenance, then the host icon will be drawn with a square. I will enable this feature, so we will see how that looks. The Mark Elements on Trigger Status Change checkbox does something similar. If there was a change in a trigger of a certain host within the last 30 minutes, then Zabbix will draw arrows pointing at the icon to inform you of the change. Zabbix does this both when a new trigger fires, as well as when the problem was resolved. I will also enable that. Expand Single Problem is also a nice option. Normally Zabbix will show you how many triggers are active for a certain host, but if there is just one active trigger, then you can make Zabbix print the actual trigger description instead of showing the count of 1. Labels are the text that are shown besides an icon. So the icon label type lets you choose the default for how labels should be displayed on the map. Either it's the label, which means that you can just customize the label freely, but I could also use IP address, so Zabbix just prints the IP address instead of the host name. Or I could use element name, which in case of a host uses the host name. Or I could use status to either show OK or problem besides the icon. And of course I can disable the label altogether. If I want more control about how labels are printed, then I can enable advanced labels, which allows me to select the layout for hosts, host groups, triggers, maps and the images separately. The icon label location allows me to set the position of the label text. The problem display option is useful when you are using the acknowledgement system. By default, when it says all, then Zabbix prints a count of all problem or triggers that affect a certain host. When you select Separated, Zabbix will show both the unacknowledged and the acknowledged problems. And when you choose Unacknowledged only, Zabbix will only print those problems that have not been acknowledged yet. And using the URLs, you can configure where you are taken in the web interface when you click on a certain icon. Okay, so much for the theory. Let's save this and get into the graphical editor by clicking on the map's name. So, there we have a new empty map, and it already has the nice background I created earlier. Let's take a look at the buttons at the top. The icon plus and minus buttons create or remove icons. When I click on plus, then I get a new icon. Zabbix chooses the first icon it knows, which is a cloud, and places it in the top left corner. I can just use the mouse and drag the icon to another location. When I click on the icon, I get the Properties window. So Zabbix created an image which is just a fixed graphic that is not connected to hosts or anything else. I'm just renaming it to Internet, and I'm closing the dialog. To remove an icon, I have to click on the icon and then click the minus button at the top. The grid you see in the background is just a visual aid for placing icons. When you click on Grid Shown, you can disable or enable it. When I drag this cloud icon around, it always snaps to the nearest grid position. You can see the effect more clearly when I enlarge the grid to 100 by 100 pixels. If I don't want the icons to snap, I can click on Grid On to turn that feature off. And now I can place the icon anywhere I want. But I could also click on Align Icons to snap them back in place. The Expand Macros feature is very powerful, but I will explain that in detail in the next video about showing data values in maps. But you probably saw that I left out the link buttons. A link is just a line between two icons. To show you how that works, let me add a host icon for the Zabbix server. I create a new icon, set the type to host, set the label to Zabbix server, and as the host, I choose the Zabbix server 2. Okay, the cloud icon is not useful here, so I click on the default icon and select Zabbix server 3D. I'm leaving the selection for a problem, maintenance, and disable to default, which means that the icon won't change, but I could as well use icons that make the host look differently if it's not in a normal state. Now that we have two icons, I can add a link between them. I'm selecting both icons while I hold the Control button on my keyboard, and I click on Link Plus at the top. So the green line between the two icons is the new link. When I click on Edit here, I can configure its style. For example, I can make it a bold line and paint it blue. And right below you see another nice feature. Zabbix allows me to style links differently depending on the status of a trigger. So while the link is now shown in blue, we could make it a red dotted line if we find that the internet connection goes down. I just have to click on Add and choose the trigger I want. For example, I'm using Fry's Zabbix agent is unreachable trigger. I'm setting the line type to dashed line and leaving the color to red. Now, when I apply these changes and the trigger fires, then the line changes its look. But let me show you the three remaining kinds of icons you can use in your maps. One is host groups. For example, I'm adding an icon for my group of web servers. When I choose Show Host Group, Zabbix will display one icon that shows all problems of hosts in that host group. Let me switch to the monitoring view of this map. All three web servers are down, but that is just shown in one icon. Let me get back to the editor. And when I choose Show Host Group Elements instead, then Zabbix will automatically display an icon for each host in that host group. Fit to Map makes Zabbix distribute the icons over the entire map, and that usually looks rather ugly, so let me choose a smaller area of 200 by 200 pixels. Now when I go back to the monitoring view, you see that Zabbix shows three icons for the three web servers automatically. The next available type of icon is a trigger icon. Let's show the status of the trigger called Processor Load Too High for the Zabbix server. I don't have any useful icon for a trigger, so I'll just go with the Server 24 icon. And I'll name the label CPU. So when the CPU load gets too high, this trigger will get highlighted. I usually use such triggers, for example, for server room temperatures, because they are not exactly connected to a certain host. And the last type of icon is the map. This does not display the map here, but instead creates a link to another map. So you could create an overview map, and when the map link is clicked, you would be taken to the chosen map. So this has been quite a lot of information about one of the most useful features in Zabbix. Play around with your own maps and see how you can use them for yourself. They are not only useful for networks, but also for replications of databases or, say, load balancer and web server infrastructure. In the next video, I will also give you more tips on maps and how to use macros to display actual data in your maps and not just the icons.